My wife went on a work trip after telling me I'd never succeed. So I sent her a photo of my first million, then disappeared from everyone's life. 5 years later, she walked into my seminar with tears in her eyes. My now ex-wife told me I'd never make anything of myself, mocked my freelance career, and left for a business trip that turned into an extended absence. I turned her doubt into fuel, built $1 million brand, then cut ties with everyone and disappeared. 5 years later, she walked into my branding seminar crying. I didn't say much, just enough. I just don't get why you're still clinging to this, she said, standing in the hallway with her suitcase already zipped. You're 30. You design logos for pizza places, Armin. You think that's impressive? I think it's mine. I'm building something. You're playing house in a garage and calling it ambition. That was our last real conversation before she left. I remember standing there, looking at the closed door after the Uber drove away, feeling like the air in the apartment had changed. Everything was still in place. The mugs by the sink, her scarf on the coat rack, her charger still plugged in next to the couch, but it all felt like it belonged to a life that had already moved on. My name's Armin. I never expected to write something like this on Reddit, but here we are. Livia and I had been married for 6 years when things finally unraveled, though if I'm being honest, it had been fraying for longer than that. We met during our second year at Syracuse. She was majoring in finance. I was majoring in design. She was direct, driven, and razor sharp. I admired that. At the time, I thought we balanced each other, her pragmatism, my creativity. But after graduation, the balance tipped. She got a job right away with a consulting firm in Albany. I struggled. I took small gigs, worked at a cafe part-time, then started freelancing full-time when I got my first steady client. I wasn't bringing in much, but I believed in what I was building. I wasn't reckless. I just had a longer view than she did. The cracks started small. Passive-aggressive remarks when bills came in. Eye rolls when I'd show her my latest project. Subtle, then not-so-subtle comparisons to her friends whose husbands had real jobs. I remember once, I stayed up all night working on a branding package for a startup based in Buffalo. I was proud of it. I'd gone above and beyond, social media kits, a mock-up of the mobile UI, even pitched them a name. When I showed her, she said, "Let me guess, they're paying you in exposure?" That was Livia. Things got worse when she started traveling more. First, it was 2 days, then 4, then a full week in Chicago. I found out later that the conference had ended 2 days before she came home. I didn't confront her. Not right away. Something inside me had shifted. I no longer wanted to prove myself to her. I just wanted out, not in the dramatic way. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted space to breathe, to build, without being told every step of the way that I was delusional. So I poured myself into the one project I had put off for too long, a full digital toolkit for small businesses. Logos, social templates, color palettes, brand strategy guides. Simple, clean, and affordable. I built it in a week. Launched it with a small ad budget. I figured maybe I'd make a few $100 and at least have something I could refine later. I made $12,000 in the first 72 hours. I thought it was a fluke, but the sales kept rolling in. By the end of the month, I had more money in my account than I'd ever seen at one time. I reinvested it into better marketing, paid 2 people on Upwork to help with content creation, and kept listening to my customers. I didn't sleep much that year, but I wasn't tired. I was finally awake. Livia barely noticed. She was too wrapped up in her own world. Dinners with colleagues, flights to God knows where, texts that went unanswered for hours. I once found a message from a coworker on her phone that said, "I wish you were here instead of just pretending at home." Still, I said nothing. I was too close. It took 10 months to hit my first million. And when it happened, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't dance. I took a screenshot of the bank balance, sent it to her phone, packed a single suitcase, left my wedding ring on the nightstand, and left. I moved to Austin. No goodbye, no forwarding address. I changed my name, cut ties with everyone. Even my mother didn't know where I was for a while. I just disappeared. I bought a house in a quiet neighborhood, hired a small but loyal team, and focused on building the kind of business I had dreamed of in those late-night garage sessions. And I was good at it. 2 years in, I was invited to speak at branding events. 3 years in, I turned down a book deal. 4 years in, I started mentoring new designers. I kept my face mostly off camera, let my work speak for me. Then came year 5. I was invited to keynote a branding summit in Chicago. I hesitated. Something about it felt poetic, too poetic. But I agreed. And on the day of the event, just moments before going on stage, I looked into the audience and saw her. Livia. Hair shorter. Face softer. Same eyes. She was sitting in the front row, staring at me like she wasn't sure I was real. And here's the weird part. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was distant. Removed. Like she belonged to a different book on a different shelf in a different life. I told the story. Not the romanticized version. The real one. About failure. About being dismissed. About building quietly. About proving someone wrong in the most beautiful way possible by not needing to anymore. When I finished, people clapped. She didn't move. Afterward, she waited by the stage stairs. I walked up slowly. She didn't speak at first, just looked at me like she was watching a ghost walk in from the cold. "I didn't know," she finally said. Her voice was cracked, brittle. "I did," I replied. That was always the difference. We stood there for a second, the noise of the crowd humming around us. She opened her mouth, maybe to ask something, maybe to apologize. I didn't wait to find out. I just nodded once and walked away. I didn't look back as I walked out of that room. The applause from the seminar still echoed faintly in the hallway behind me, but my mind was quiet. Numb almost. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. That surprised me. I thought seeing her again might stir something visceral, but all I felt was a kind of detachment. Like watching a film I'd seen too many times, where I already knew how it ended. Outside, the wind off the lake was sharp and cold. Chicago in early spring always carried a bite, not winter exactly, but not quite spring either. I stood on the sidewalk for a while, letting my breath slow down, trying to decide whether to call my driver or just walk a bit to clear my head. I chose the latter. A lot can change in 5 years. Neighborhoods gentrify, storefronts flip, entire skylines can morph. But the feeling of walking alone through a city after a moment like that stayed the same. The liminality of it. The pause between what was and what comes next. I ducked into a quiet cafe a few blocks down from the venue, ordered a black coffee, and sat in the corner with my coat still on. I didn't check my phone. I knew what would be there: messages from event organizers, LinkedIn connection requests, probably at least a few emails from attendees looking for advice or partnerships. And maybe a message from her. But I wasn't ready to see it. Not yet. Instead, I stared out the window, watching people pass by. Couples, kids, a guy in a puffer jacket walking a golden retriever that looked half asleep. I imagined, for a moment, a version of myself in that crowd. Anonymous, quiet, untouched by what had just happened upstairs in that hotel ballroom. But that wasn't my life anymore. That night, back in my hotel room, I finally opened my messages. She'd texted, "I'm not sure if you'll even read this, but I needed to say something. You were always building something beautiful. I just didn't have the vision to see it. I'm sorry." No emojis. No drama. Just that. I stared at the message for a long time. I didn't reply. The next day, I flew back to Austin. The sun felt different there, warmer, more grounded. My home was quiet when I returned. My dog, Bo, greeted me like I'd been gone a year, not 2 days. He was the only soul I'd trusted with everything since the beginning. Found him at a shelter just outside San Marcos the same week I signed my first major licensing deal. He didn't care about branding or old ghosts from New York. He just wanted to sit on my lap while I answered emails and sneak half my breakfast when I wasn't looking. That night, I opened my laptop and reviewed the seminar footage. Not because I needed to, I'd done hundreds of talks by then, but because I wanted to see if it was all real, if I had imagined her. But there she was, in high definition. Front row, her eyes never leaving mine. And something about that made my throat tighten. I closed the video. I didn't block her number. I didn't delete the message. But I also didn't reply. It wasn't about anger anymore. It was just wait. The kind of heavy silence that comes after you've outgrown a version of yourself so completely that you don't even remember how to wear it anymore. Still, that encounter did something to me. I found myself more introspective in the weeks that followed. My team noticed. Hazel, my head of operations, asked if everything was okay. I told her it was, and technically it was. But I was restless. So I did what I always did when I needed clarity. I drove. No destination. No music. Just open Texas roads and long, steady thoughts. Somewhere between Waco and Temple, I pulled over at a roadside diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 80s. Ordered black coffee and scrambled eggs. Sat there for 2 hours, thinking. Not about Livia. About me. I thought about the man I used to be. The one who stayed quiet. Who made himself small to keep the peace. Who second-guessed his worth because someone he loved kept tallying up his failures. And then I thought about the man I'd become. Not perfect. Not invincible. But certain of his own voice. And that certainty was worth everything I'd lost along the way. When I got back to Austin, I took a week off for the first time in years. Walked more. Read more. Met with a therapist I'd been meaning to call for months. We talked about old wounds. About how praise from strangers had replaced the validation I never got at home. About how success had become a shield I wore so tight. I hadn't noticed how heavy it was getting. It was hard. Humbling. But necessary. A month later, I got another message from her. "I saw the podcast. You said something about building for people who'd been overlooked. I think that's what you were trying to do all along, even when I didn't see it. I hope you're doing well." I didn't delete that one either. I didn't answer it. But this time, I didn't stare at it as long. Summer arrived fast that year in Austin. The kind that doesn't gently nudge spring out of the way, but slams through the door with heat waves and burnt orange skies. I was hosting a small workshop series for first-time entrepreneurs. Not the big flashy seminars, just intimate groups of people trying to turn garage dreams into something more. It felt good to be back in the weeds with beginners. There's something humbling about watching someone fumble through their first product pitch, their voice shaking, their eyes darting between notes and nervous glances. I saw a younger version of myself in every one of them. One afternoon, after a session wrapped, Hazel pulled me aside in the hallway. She called again. I didn't have to ask who. I told her you weren't taking personal meetings right now. But she said she's moving to Austin, starting fresh. Said she wasn't expecting anything. Just thought you'd want to know. I nodded. Didn't say much. Just stood there, processing that simple line. She's moving to Austin. Later that night, I walked Bo around Lady Bird Lake. I didn't bring my phone. Didn't want the weight of notifications or messages. Just the water, the wind, and the sound of his paws tapping against the trail. There's something meditative about walking a familiar path at dusk. The way the city hums in the background. The way you start to hear your own thoughts more clearly when there's no one around to interrupt them. And this was the thought that kept surfacing. What does she want? Not in an angry or suspicious way. Just genuinely. Livia and I had shared so much history, but that version of us belonged to another world. One built on assumptions, misalignment, ego, silence. And now here she was, entering my world, years later, just as I'd finally found peace in it. I didn't contact her, but I didn't stop thinking about her, either. 2 weeks passed. I was reviewing applications for a mentorship grant we were offering, helping underrepresented founders get access to branding tools and capital, when Hazel buzzed in. There's a visitor. I didn't respond at first. I was in the middle of writing feedback notes and thought she might mean a walk-in client. Then she added, quietly, it's her. My first instinct was to say no. Tell her I was in a meeting. Ask her to reschedule. But my second instinct, the quieter one, was curious. Let her in. Livia looked different. Not in the obvious ways. Her hair was longer again, her makeup minimal. But it was in her posture. The way she stood, shoulders not squared but slightly drawn inward, hands clasped in front of her like she wasn't quite sure if she belonged in the room. She didn't speak right away. Just looked around the office. The exposed brick walls. The framed thank you letters from clients. The whiteboard behind me with ideas half-scribbled from yesterday's team brainstorm. This is yours, she said finally. I nodded. It always was. Silence again. I didn't come here to rehash the past, she said. I know I said a lot of things back then that I can't take back. And I know I didn't see what you were building. Not really. But I'm not here to fix that. I waited. Let her continue. I've been working with a local nonprofit, helping immigrant families with financial planning. It's small, but it feels meaningful. I guess I just wanted you to know I finally understand what it's like to build something that matters, even when no one sees it at first. That caught me off guard. Not the job, but the humility. The version of her standing in my office wasn't the woman who once rolled her eyes when I explained vector formats. She was quieter now, measured, still direct, but softer. I offered her a seat. We talked. Not about us. Not really. More about the in-between years. She mentioned how after our divorce, she stayed in consulting for a while, climbed the ladder a bit, but felt hollow. Said the turning point was a client meeting where she realized she didn't believe in the product she was selling anymore. I walked out, she said. Didn't even grab my bag. Just left. I told her about the toolkit launch. The all-nighters. The moment I realized success doesn't always feel triumphant. Sometimes it just feels like quiet relief. For a while, it felt like two people simply acknowledging. No accusations. No blame. Just the truth of what had been and the recognition of how far apart those versions of ourselves had grown. After about an hour, she stood up. I don't expect anything, Armin. I just wanted to face you. Say thank you for building the life you said you would. Even when I didn't believe in it. I nodded slowly. Took me longer to believe in myself than you think. She gave a small smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes but means something anyway, and walked out. She didn't text that night, or the night after, and I didn't reach out either. But the silence felt different now. Less unfinished. More spacious. The days that followed weren't turbulent the way you might expect. I wasn't suddenly spiraling or distracted or questioning every decision I'd made in the last 5 years. If anything, I felt strangely clear. Livia's visit hadn't thrown me off. It had clarified something. She'd finally seen me. Maybe too late to matter in the way she once thought, but it wasn't nothing. I didn't tell anyone what we talked about. Hazel had a way of reading people like an open book, and when she handed me a coffee 2 mornings after the visit, she said, "You okay?" in that subtle, knowing way. Yeah, I said. Actually, yeah. And I meant it. Business went on. That week we closed a partnership deal with a small agency in Toronto, and I onboarded 2 new creatives into the team. The rhythm of work kept me grounded, as it always had. But I noticed little shifts in myself. I was more patient in meetings, more thoughtful during mentorship calls, more present. It was as if something heavy I hadn't even known I was carrying had finally been set down. But life has a way of looping back on itself. Austin's big enough to disappear into, but it's still a small town in the ways that count. Especially in the nonprofit space, which, coincidentally or not, was exactly where Livia had found herself. I got invited to speak at a community business expo one weekend, sponsored by a coalition of local charities. I said yes without thinking twice. It wasn't a flashy event, just a bunch of folding chairs under string lights in a renovated community center. I like that. What I didn't expect was to see her again. She was working the check-in table, clipboard in hand, directing volunteers. She didn't see me at first. She was laughing with a younger woman in a yellow hijab, pointing toward the breakout rooms. Her voice was lighter than I remembered it. I stood off to the side for a few moments, watching her move through the crowd. She looked rooted, like she belonged. I debated turning around, just walking out. I wasn't nervous, just uncertain of what this repetition in the universe was trying to say. But before I could decide, she spotted me. We exchanged a nod. Just that. No wave, no smile, no sudden lurch toward each other. Just acknowledgement. Later that evening, after my segment wrapped and most of the crowd had dispersed, I went to grab a bottled water from the back table. She was there too, rearranging name tags and chatting with another volunteer. She turned to me like it was the most natural thing in the world. Hey, hey, I liked your talk, she said. The part about failure not being a sign you're wrong, but that you're early, that stuck with me. I nodded. It stuck with me too. Took a while. We talked. Again, not about us. Not directly. But there was an ease this time that hadn't been there in the office visit. Less weight, more familiarity. She told me how the nonprofit was expanding, new grants, community classes. She mentioned she was taking courses in social work at UT. I never thought I'd be the one back in school, she laughed. But I like being the one listening now instead of always explaining. I said I admired that. She shrugged. Takes a lot of unlearning. The conversation lingered well into cleanup time. Other people left. Chairs were stacked. We were still standing there, drinking room temp water like it was champagne. At some point, she asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime. No pressure, she added quickly. It's not a thing. And it wasn't. But I said yes. Not because I wanted to dive back into anything. Not because I missed her. But because something about who we were now, two people who'd been broken apart by ambition, pride, and misalignment, felt like it deserved a little more airtime than just nods in passing. The coffee wasn't dramatic. It was on a quiet Wednesday at a place near East 6th, the kind of cafe where no one brings laptops and the croissants are always sold out by 10. She got black coffee. I got chai. We talked for nearly 3 hours. About our families. Hers was still in Buffalo. Mine had retired to Sarasota. About her old firm and why she left. About my business and why I hadn't gone public despite being courted by investors. I don't want to answer to people who've never risked anything but other people's money, I said. She smiled. That sounds exactly like something you'd say. The conversations became weekly, then twice a week. Then, without either of us really planning it, we were sitting across from each other in a booth at a ramen place, and I realized it didn't feel strange anymore. It just felt familiar, comfortable. I didn't know what it meant, and I didn't push to define it. But the strangest part was, for the first time in years, it didn't feel like I was protecting something. My pride, my history, my wounds. It felt like I was just showing up. Honestly, without pretense. And maybe she was too. The coffee meetings continued. There was never a moment where either of us said, let's get back together. No declarations. No confessions. Just more conversations. Honest ones. Small moments of connection built over warm drinks, long walks, and shared silences. I wasn't sure where it was heading, and that was fine with me. We were two different people now. That much was clear. But the ghosts of who we used to be still hovered nearby. Sometimes they showed up in the way she hesitated when asking about my company, or the way I deflected when she asked about relationships after her. I did date in those years after leaving. Nothing serious. Nothing that lasted. Mostly because I'd spent so much time protecting the life I'd built, I didn't know how to let anyone truly into it. It was mine. Hard-earned. Scarred in places. And I wasn't about to let someone turn it into a shared project until I knew they wouldn't dismantle it the way she once did. But Livia, she didn't try to own it this time. She just asked questions. Listened. And slowly, I stopped keeping score. But I didn't forget. That's an important distinction. A few months later, I was invited to be the keynote speaker for a national business accelerator program. This was a big one, televised, streamed globally, sponsored by a long list of household brands. It was the kind of invitation you accept with a nod, but behind the scenes, you're grinning like a lunatic. The topic? Building resilience from rejection. You can imagine how fast my mind went back to her. To the small Albany apartment. The nights in the garage. The way she once called my work a fantasy. I wasn't angry anymore. But the poetic symmetry of the opportunity didn't escape me. A week before the event, we had dinner. She knew about the talk, of course. I didn't hide it. But that night, she brought up something that caught me off guard. I got a call from Rains Corp, she said. They want me to come back. Big role. National leadership position. I looked at her. Do you want that? She shook her head slowly. I used to. Not anymore. I waited. They said one of their partners recommended me. A partner who believed in redemption arcs, she added, narrowing her eyes at me. I smiled. I may have spoken with them. Briefly. She laughed, almost in disbelief. You're serious? I shrugged. Let's call it poetic justice. You turned them down. I did, she said. 5 years ago, I would have slaughtered for that job. Now, I'd rather help a family find a mortgage they can actually afford. I nodded. She'd changed. I knew that now. But it was still time for my version of closure. At the keynote, the venue was packed. Thousands in the auditorium. Lights, cameras, everything. Livia was in the crowd again, not front row this time, but close. I saw her when I walked out on stage. And I gave the speech of my life. I talked about being told you're not enough. About how some people love conditionally. When your success makes them look good, when your ambition aligns with their comfort zone. I didn't name names. I didn't point fingers. But the words landed with weight. I was once told my business would never work, I said, pacing slowly across the stage. That I was wasting my time. That the best thing I could do was give up and settle. I paused. The room was silent. But what those people don't realize is, when you tell a builder they'll never succeed, you don't break them. You give them blueprints. That line got applause. Not polite applause. Real, visceral, Weavy felt this applause. I smiled. Not out of arrogance. Out of peace. When the talk ended, I skipped the press. I wasn't interested in the spotlight. I walked out through the side hallway and caught a glimpse of Livia standing near the exit, talking to one of the program organizers. She saw me. We locked eyes. She didn't smile. Neither did I. Just a nod. The same kind of nod you give someone who was once a big chapter in your life, but not the whole book. Later that week, she asked to meet for lunch. I saw the talk, she said, stirring her drink. I figured. You didn't say my name. But you didn't have to. I looked at her calm. It wasn't about blame. It was about truth. She nodded. I deserve that. Probably more. I leaned back. You don't owe me guilt, Livia. That version of us is over. But you helped shape the version of me that built everything. Whether that's a thank you or a warning, I haven't decided. She laughed. Not a bitter laugh. The kind you let out when someone's right. So where does that leave us? She asked. I smiled softly. Exactly where we are. Two people who survived each other. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for another chance. She just looked at me for a long time, then said, I'm glad you made it, Armin. I finished my drink and stood up. I was always going to. You just left early. She watched me go. No chasing. No drama. And that was the most satisfying part of all. I didn't have to destroy her. I didn't need to win the breakup. I didn't even need her to beg. I just needed her to see. And now she did. Not the version of me she once doubted, mocked, minimized. The one who built the life she said I couldn't. And left nothing behind to prove it. Except the fact that I didn't need her anymore. The business has grown, not explosively, not in a flashy IPO kind of way, but with stability. Intentionality. I expanded the mentorship program, built a fund to support underrepresented creators, and quietly launched a podcast that somehow found its own little loyal audience. I still work. Every day. Because I love it. Not because I need to prove anything. I sold the house last fall. Not because I was running from anything. I just wanted something simpler. I live out near Driftwood now. A smaller place with big windows and too many trees. Bo still runs the place like he pays the mortgage. I still don't post much online. You won't find me doing TikToks or inspirational threads. That was never my style. I stay low to the ground and focus on people who are building things that matter. Livia and I don't talk anymore. Not out of anger. Just life. She moved to Denver, last I heard, running community financial programs. She sends a donation to my nonprofit once a year, always anonymous, but I know her handwriting when I see it on the envelope. We had our time. She helped shape who I became, even if her role in the story was the storm I had to outlast. And me? I met someone. Not like before. She doesn't need the spotlight. She doesn't need to be impressed. She just shows up. Real, kind, sharp, steady. We plant herbs in the backyard. Argue over music in the car. Laugh at the same bad movies. And when I stay up late sketching out new ideas, she brings me tea. She believes in what I'm building. Not because it's already a success, but because she sees the why behind it. That's the difference. That's what I never had before. I no longer build to prove someone wrong. I build because someone finally believed I could, even before it was obvious. And that, I've learned, is the only kind of foundation worth building anything on.